little bit of an experiment, since I'm getting acquainted with it, because each stone has a unique character, essentially. We've got unique chemical compositions based on where they were in the layer of strata, and that will kind of dictate their aesthetic possibilities and their compatibilities with different techniques. So the stone's currently at a state where it's been drawn with an image and etched, which means that I've basically used an acidified treatment of gum arabic, just like the binder in watercolor, that basically tells the non-image, stay clean, makes it a hydrophilic, kind of water-loving, grease-rejecting layer, as long as it's kept damp. But all the drawing materials are made with greasy materials or really waterproof materials. And from there, we have to remove them before you can print from them. They're not durable enough to print from. So at this point, we do what we call washing out, where we'll remove it with some solvent. We try to keep it really low tox, but this is kind of the most solventy part of the project. And here in Australia, where possible, I like to work with eucalyptus oil, which isn't as common outside of Australia because it's so much more expensive. But that said, the price has gone up through and beyond COVID. Litho was actually originally named chemical printing by the inventor Alice Sennefelder back in 1796, and it wasn't very catchy. The name didn't stick, understandably. So lithography, stone writing is definitely much more poetic.
And what are you excited to learn on your fellowship? Why did you apply?
Essentially, I've always been looking for having that one additional step of essentially apprenticeship, kind of another intensive under another experienced printmaker. You know, I've been doing printmaking and litho for a bit over a decade now. But there's a lifetime of knowledge to know. And it changes so quickly now. It really benefits from working with other practitioners and cross-pollinating our practices, because we're all reacting to different changes. A lot of the products that we've relied on historically end up phased out by the manufacturers who think there isn't a demand for them anymore, especially the things that come from the commercial printing world, which understandably keeps working towards low tox and alternative methods that then become incompatible with what we do for a time until we figure out the next workaround. So essentially, to have the opportunity to do a fellowship like this that really allows me to engage with a multitude of studios, potentially in America and in Europe, is the working plan. Where litho came from. Litho was born in Germany, and really the biggest deposit of knowledge is still in Europe. And there are those pinnacle locations in America that really helped keep it alive as a fine art medium when it started to die out and become a strictly commercial printing medium. And so a lot of the resources in the rest of the world come from those centers. And it's not that there isn't incredible work being done here, it's just that a lot of those resources still come from there. A lot of our materials, a lot of our inks and other related sundries still have to be imported from Europe or America. Not a lot of it can be manufactured here with the current kind of level of demand, essentially, and availability of materials. So it's expensive and it's hard to get, and you have to really commit to that. But one of the biggest problems really is that a lot of the reference materials are written for those climates, supply chains, regulations. There are materials that aren't even allowed to be imported for use in Australia that are referred to in the manuals because they're that one step too toxic or toxic in that one way. So we work on a lot of the alternatives. And it would really be beneficial to talk to the people who develop those techniques and resource manuals, help make them aware of this, but also consult to develop good instructional materials that are really focused on the Australian and regional demands, availabilities, restrictions. So we're hopefully working towards a manual of lithography for Oceania, essentially.
Amazing.
So
That's amazing.
So this is just water, but I keep it cold. Helps kind of keep the ink corralled. The ink that we use is an oil base, and it's very high tack. It's very thick. But one of its properties is that, of course, it will want to spread the warmer it gets and the thicker it gets. So if we keep it colder with the sponging water here, then it's more likely to stay right where I want it. So what makes the process work here, there's kind of a chemical stencil in play as much as a chemical treatment. So I've desensitized the non-image to grease, hopefully closing it. So what that means is essentially I've made it so anywhere that I didn't draw shouldn't want to get inky. It should want to attract water as long as I keep it damp. But if the stone dries out during the printing process or this next step, then it would just roll up black. It'd be as black as the ink slab over there, or whatever color I'm rolling up in. But right now, I've just applied what we call an image base, and this would be bitumen in this case. It's one of the very core traditional materials, which we keep working towards non-toxic alternatives to, but especially for stones, it's just so reliable, it gets the job done. It's still one of the go-tos day to day. But it's sitting on top of a thin film of gum arabic that's been buffed in, which is water soluble and impervious to grease. So you can see I'm cleaning off the border here first just to kind of help manage the mess and start that process going, but I'm going to now do a full wash off. And all the bitumen that's just covering the surface here should wash off from the areas where the image is clear. And from here I kind of have to work pretty briskly and work to the rhythm of the stone. Get this really nice and wet. But that bitumen has replaced all those drawing materials, all of the greasy crayons and washes that have been used. And now sits in the image area. And in theory, my ink should be attracted to that. And once I've seen all that brown material stain to the color of the ink, which in this case is black, then I know it's rolled up full. I want to start avoiding anywhere that's actually at a nice rich tone and just focus on the areas that need to catch up. I can start slowing down to kind of nuance that and feather it. At this point I can switch to nicer, cleaner sponges. That'll help me moderate that a little more easily. You can hear the ink changing in character just a little bit there, maybe. As the roller gets loaded up again. So from here I've got what would be called a wet sponge and a dry sponge. They're both damp and soft, but the wet sponge carries water. The dry sponge is wrung out to where we can pick up the excess and get down to just the minimum necessary. from here, going for a nice rich dark tone anywhere that should be a solid black in the image, and just the nice delicate details, and going dark, losing all of that delicacy. And that's looking pretty good. At this point, we typically don't print unless the stone is being very cooperative for plate, if that would be the case. Because I would say so, yeah. So what we're looking for here is that it's not threatening to fill in all of our subtle midtones and delicate areas. But this isn't what we'd call fully stabilized yet, typically. There are different strategies, but one of the main approaches is what we'd call a two-etch system, where we would etch the drawing, replace it with ink, and then etch it again to fully stabilize the stone. Because it's a very nuanced chemical balance that we're trying to maintain here. Strong enough of an etch that the image will be stable, but not so strong that you'll burn out all of those fine details too, lose parts of the image. So one of those strategies is to split it up over 2 times, and then you can nuance and refine that etch after the first one. Last one. Which slowly disappears as the ink settles again. I wouldn't be surprised if the first one is light. We typically like the first impression to be light and get darker with each successive print. But this will hopefully at least give us an idea of what's going on.